Today we're counting down the top 5 moments that didn't just bend the F1 rules but shattered them. Secret fuel tanks, stolen data, and all of that good stuff. You name it. As always, don't forget to hit that like button and turn on the notifications. We'll start off easy with our number 5 in our list. This scandal took place in 2019, and the great Ferrari was involved in it. So what happened? During the 2019 season, Ferrari unveiled a car that felt like a rocket ship, especially on those long straights. I mean, it was clear that they had a power unit that outpaced rivals like Mercedes and Red Bull. Other teams were clearly jealous, and as the season progressed, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Was Ferrari's speed too good to be true? You bet it was. Here's where things get really interesting. The FIA introduced a fuel flow sensor to regulate how much fuel could be delivered to the engine, designed to level the playing field. But Ferrari's engineers, they pulled off a clever stunt by not clearly cheating, but still, this was unfair. They figured out how to manipulate that sensor, which was taking measurements of staggering 2,200 times per second. And during those tiny windows when the sensor wasn't monitoring, they injected extra fuel into the engine. It was impressive, because this trickery gave them extra power right when it mattered most. So, Red Bull, noticing Ferrari's suspicious advantage, raised alarms with the FIA. And honestly, I think they were right to do so. Once the spotlight was on Ferrari, scrutiny intensified. By the end of the season in 2020, Ferrari's performance plummeted, landing them in a disappointing 6th place in the constructors' standings. They didn't face any formal penalties, but it was pretty clear that they had been forced to back off from the controversial fuel system. What I find fascinating and a bit frustrating is how this encapsulates the internal cat-and-mouse game in F1. As you can guess, it made an impact on the whole F1 system. The Popo FIA responded by tightening the rules around fuel flow even further, making it much harder for teams to exploit the system in the future. If you want to play big, play fair, I guess. For 4th place, we got an oldie one. It's Tyrell's underweight car scandal in 1984. I find it as a classic tale of desperation from a once great team that just couldn't keep up with the turbocharged revolution sweeping through F1. During the 1984 season, Tyrell's cars were discovered to be running underweight, a serious violation of F1 regulations. Check out the stats. The minimum weight requirements was set at 540 kilograms, and Tyrell's management to sidestep this by cheating. What they did? They filled their fuel tanks with a mixture of water and lead shot, allowing their cars to race lighter and gain a competitive edge. The strategy was simple. During the race, the cars would run lighter and faster, but at the end, they would top up the water to meet the minimum weight requirements during post-race inspections. Overall, it was a gamble, if you ask me. As usual, bad guys got caught in the end. Competitors began to raise eyebrows, especially when lead shot was found spilled in the pit lane during pit stops. So, FIA launched an investigation. It didn't take long to reveal the truth behind these shenanigans. The FIA confirmed the scandal. Tyrell was disqualified from the championships, and all the results from the 1984 season were annulled. I think that this was a monumental decision that sent shockwaves through the paddock. And from there, it was all about going downhill for Tyrell. Sponsors didn't want to mess with cheaters, and after a few more stagnant years, Tyrell never managed to reclaim the glory they once enjoyed. And eventually, in 94, the team got sold, and the final race for Tyrell took place in 98's Japan Grand Prix. So, for our bronze, we got one of those under-the-radar scandals that deserves way more attention than it gets. A classic bend the rules to your favorite type of action happened in San Marino Grand Prix. BarHonda had already positioned itself as a serious player by the 2004 season, giving Ferrari a run for their money in the constructors' standings. Jenson Button and Takuma Sato were driving the wheels off their cars, and it looked like BAR might be on the rise. Then, the 2005 seasons came, and with it, a scandal that threw their reputation off a cliff. After the San Marino Grand Prix, where Button landed a 3rd place finish, the FIA found out that BAR had been using a hidden fuel tank. I find that the way it worked was genius and a little diabolical. Once again, it wasn't all about the weight of the car, but now, F1 regulations stated that the car, with its fuel, had to weigh at least 600 kilograms at all times. BarHonda's setup allowed them to run lighter during the race itself, giving them an edge in speed. Then, once the race was over, these guys topped up their weight with the hidden fuel tank, so the car could hit that 600 kilo minimum on the scales. But after all, FIA got wise to the trick. Aftermath, the FIA didn't just slap a small penalty on BarHonda. It was treated as calculated deception, and the team was disqualified from the San Marino GP and handed a brutal 2-race ban. I'll be real, in a season as intense as F1, missing 2 races is like losing a chunk of your soul. Add to that the loss of points from previous races, and BarHonda's 2005 campaign was effectively dead in the water. You see the similarities, right? BarHonda shed Tyrell's fate, and after that scandal, the team were never quite the same. Why? The trust was gone. For us silvers, we got Crashgate. It was the 2008 Singapore Grand Prix, F1's first ever night race, under the dazzling lights of a tight, unforgiving street circuit. The pressure was intense, and Renault, with Fernando Alonso starting from a lowly 15th on the grid, needed something big to turn their fortunes around, so they didn't want to play by the rules. So instead of going for a strategy masterclass relying on Alonso's skill, they chose a plan that would quite literally crash their way to the front. It was wild. Renault's leadership orchestrated a deliberate crash involving their second driver, Nelson Piquet Jr. That's right, right, Piquet was ordered to crash, and not just anywhere, but at a carefully chosen spot on lap 14, triggering a safety car deployment. Now, this was key because Alonso had just pitted, so when the safety car came out and bunched up the field, Alonso was suddenly sitting pretty up front. The end result? He won the race. At the time, it looked like a brilliant stroke of luck, but as we all know, luck had nothing to do with it. How the automotive world found out that this was a deception? A year later, Piquet blew the lid off the whole scheme after he was dropped from the team. And let me tell you, when the truth came out, it was like a bomb went off in the F1 paddock. A straight, premeditated act of race manipulation, completely against everything F1 stands for. So, the FIA, as always, launched a full investigation, and their verdict was clear. Team principal Flavio Briatore and executive director Pat Simmons were found guilty of masterminding the whole operation. Briatore was slapped with a lifetime ban, and Simmons received a 5-year ban after appealing. Renault, meanwhile, got a suspended ban, meaning they were walking on thin ice and one misstep away from being kicked out of F1. Crashgate's fallout was enormous. Renault's reputation took a nosedive. They lost major sponsors, and for years, the team struggled to shake off the stigma of their involvement. Alonso, who was also cleared of any knowledge of the scheme, managed to sidestep the direct blame. But I'll be honest, Crashgate is an ugly shadow that still hangs over his legacy. I mean, here's a guy who went on to become a legend in the sport, but there's no denying this chapter in his career feels tainted. And here is our winner. Spygate, in my opinion, is the juiciest tale of high-stakes espionage F1 has ever seen. Imagine this, one of the most legendary teams in the sport, McLaren, caught red-handed in a scandal that sounds like something out of a thriller. And who's at the heart of it? None other than Ferrari and a rogue employee named Nigel Stepney, who turned F1's 2007 season into a battleground of corporate intrigue. So, Stepney wasn't just any Ferrari employee. He was a seasoned engineer who had worked through the Michael Schumacher era, witnessing Ferrari's dominance firsthand. By 2007, he was frustrated, feeling overlooked and increasingly disillusioned with the team after a restructuring. And so, I guess, in a move that stunned everyone, he turned to McLaren's chief designer, Mike Coughlin, and handed him the keys to Ferrari's kingdom. 780 pages of pure, classified Ferrari intelligence. I'm talking detailed specs on aerodynamics, weight distribution, pit strategies, the whole 9 yards. If you're thinking this sounds like having an entire playbook on your rival, you're exactly right. McLaren now had access to every little detail for Ferrari's 2007 car. Just imagine the possibilities. One small, maybe unimportant detail made the revelation possible. The whole operation blew up thanks to a quick-thinking copy shop employee. Coughlin's wife had taken these sensitive Ferrari documents to a local photocopying shop in Woking to make copies. The assistant spotted the Ferrari logo, raised an eyebrow, and didn't waste any time. He alerted Ferrari directly. Ferrari went straight to the FIA, and the ensuing investigation rocked F1 to its core. Insane, right? At first, McLaren claimed they hadn't used the data, but come on, this was Ferrari's entire 2007 playbook. Email exchanges soon surfaced between McLaren's staff discussing the Ferrari data in ways that were too hard to ignore. While McLaren maintained they hadn't used it on the car itself, the fact they even had it was enough for the FIA to throw the book at them. The fine McLaren received? An eye-watering $100 million. The biggest fine in F1 history, and more than the yearly budget of some teams. That punishment still boggles my mind. And if that wasn't enough, McLaren was disqualified from the Constructors' Championship that season. But here's the twist. Their drivers, Lewis Hamilton and Fernando Alonso, were allowed to keep racing. Why? The FIA decided they couldn't prove the drivers had personally benefited from the stolen data, even though the scandal hung over their heads all season. So, McLaren's reputation took a huge hit. They lost major sponsors and found themselves the focus of a wider debate about ethics in the sport. In 2007, you had Hamilton and Alonso locked in an epic title fight within McLaren, a rivalry that was already tense, and all of it unfolding under the shadow of Spygate. Ferrari's Kimi Raikkonen eventually clinched the title, but the drama that season was off the charts. And looking back, Spygate was all about the insane pressures and blurred ethical lines in a sport where winning is everything, and teams are willing to push the boundaries to get there. What was your favorite? Let us know in the comments. Like, subscribe,